All right, we're gonna watch the video ranking all Hearthstone expansions, and then after this video, we'll go back to Hearthstone. All right, Rarran, let's see if we agree with Rarran on tier listing the Hearthstone expansions. Why is this so low? Last attempt.
Hearthstone has a lot of expansions. Some are good, some are bad, some are questionable, but let's do a tier list for all of them. The way that I'm rating this tier list is based on how much enjoyment I got out of them, and make sure you do your own tier list. I'll leave a link in the description down below, and while you're down there, make sure you subscribe. A lot of you aren't, and I would appreciate it. For this tier list, I'm not including the basic set as well as the Demon Hunter Initiate set, because even though they're like kind of expansions, they're not really. So the basic set will be included in Classic, and the Demon Hunter Initiate set will be included in Ashes of Outlands. Starting off with Hearthstone Classic. So Hearthstone Classic was cool because when they first released the game, it was a complete game.
I turned them up another 20%.
A lot of the meta was already kind of solved in itself, where there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of interesting stuff to try out. It was a really well-designed game. Now, some of the stuff was pretty broken. Like Miracle Rogue is still extremely...
Hey, did you notice, King, how he brought up in the first... This was actually in the first 40 seconds of the video, he brought up you should sub to the channel. At least I wait until the 3-minute mark.
Good. Power overwhelming. Zero mana Soulfire was gross, but overall, there was a lot of
zero
broken
mana
stuff in that
Soulfire
expansion. Or I guess,
dude, I remember Handlocks going Leroy Jenkins, and then they go Soulfire into Soulfire, and it's 14 damage burst, or they go Leroy Power Overwhelming. That's 14 damage, and then Soulfire is 18. Soulfire was 0, Power was 1, and Innervate was 0. Gain 2 mana crystals this turn, and this didn't have Overload. So this was a Bloom without Overload, and this was in the base set.
In the classic set. So I'm kind of for
and
putting it as
an
A,
for a
but
while.
I will be honest, I do think that Hearthstone Classic gets a little bit of a pass because it was the very first time Hearthstone came out, and I think a lot of us...
I would put the classic Hearthstone into fucking S. I would put that into S because Hearthstone Classic is what turned the game into what it is today. Without if the Hearthstone Classic set wasn't good enough to be a good game, it wouldn't have solidified itself as the #1 online collectible card game. So the Hearthstone expansion has to be S, because without, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, Hearthstone is literally the largest online strategy game there is for cards. It has to be S.
Hearthstone came out, and I think a lot of us were just having fun regardless because it was a brand new game. The first expansion we had was Curse of Naxxramas, and even though it was a really small adventure, it did have a really big impact on what the game was, with Nerubian Egg, Loatheb, Sludge Belcher,
Yeah, back when, like,
importantly,
dude, Sludge Belcher was like a control warrior staple. Nerubian Egg was fantastic in Zoo Warlock. Loatheb was a 5-mana 5/5 battle cry. Enemy spells cost 5 more next turn. So if you're playing against like a Freeze Mage, which was like a very popular high skill cap deck, or even like Miracle Rogue, like Loatheb was just such a great disruption card, and they haven't really printed anything on like as powerful as Loatheb in quite some time.
Undertaker Hunter was an extremely dominant deck, and I think honestly because of how dominant it was, it kind of ruined the expansion. A lot of people look back at Curse of Naxxramas as like a really good moment in Hearthstone, but really was it? I don't remember it being like the best thing ever. It was really fun, and I think the solo adventure was one of the best aspects of it. The class challenges were great, but like overall, Curse of Naxxramas doesn't really like hold a really high bar for me. I think Undertaker Hunter really made me not want to play it as much as possible. And I'm gonna put it at like a B. I do think it had a lot of really good qualities. It wasn't like the best adventure that we've ever had, and quite frankly, I think a lot of people overhype Curse of Naxxramas.
Yo, thanks for making it this far in the video, and if you do watch my content and enjoy it, remember to sub. We have over 53% of people who are watching this channel not subbed, and just under 47% who are subbed. It really helps the channel out and shows to YouTube that people are watching and enjoying the content, which recommends more people who may be interested but not yet watching. So with that, let's get back to the games and enjoy.
Next, we have Goblins versus Gnomes, and this set was really interesting because it had a really powerful neutral set. Dr. Boom, Piloted Shredder, Mech Warper. It basically enabled a lot of tempo decks, and some of the tempo decks...
Dr. Boom was the best 7-drop neutral card in the game. He was called Dr. 7, and you know, he was a 7-mana 7/7 summon 2/1/1 boom bots, and that card would single-handedly win you the game. That was the power level. Mech Warper was fantastic, found in any sort of mech deck. So you could like Mech Warper, coin Mech Warper, and then go crazy on the board with like a whole bunch of small mechs. That's also in Mech Mage was a thing. And then Piloted Shredder was the best neutral 4-drop. Again, found in like almost every single deck that it has like existed at that time. Because it summoned a random 2-drop minion, and then in the 2-drop pool, there was like Lorewalker Cho and Millhouse Mana Storm, which were like some of the most 2 like game-changing cards. I straight up have lost multiple games because of my opponent rolling like Millhouse, which is a 2-mana 4/4. So they basically summoned a 4-mana 8/7, or the Cho, and I was playing like a spell-heavy deck, and then my opponent got like all my spells. So these are some like really key cards from Goblins and Gnomes.
Were absolutely insane. There's a lot of poorly designed cards in this set. Implosion, Crackle,
oh my god. Implosion, bro.
Were absolutely insane. There's a lot of poorly designed cards in this set. Implosion.
Dude, a 4-mana deal 2, or it was deal 2, deal 3, or deal 4. So it would randomly choose a fucking number, and then it would summon imps based on the damage it did. So you could play a 4-mana 2 damage, summon 2 1/1s, or a 4-mana deal 4, summon 4 1/1s. It was just fucking random. Holy shit. Implosion sucked dick. Crackle, another tilting burn shaman card. So they go Crackle, they either hit for 3 or they hit for 6. That's a big fucking difference. So if your opponent has like 6 life left and you Crackle and it hits 3, it's like, well, guess I lose. But if it hits 6, it's like, oh my god, he high rolled. Like dealing a set number and then just anything up to a certain number was some of the worst Hearthstone design I think I have ever seen in the game. You have to do a static effect. You can't do like this, like you can do it, and that's a perfect example of like not a static effect that has random outcomes that don't feel as bad as Yogg, right? So Yogg spins the wheel, and then there's a certain percent for each one, and then each one does its own thing. Meanwhile, Crackle is kind of the same way. It could roll between 3 and 6, but like, it's, you know what I mean? If a Yogg rolls on a 6, it's just a different outcome rather than if it rolls on a 3. It doesn't actually relate to damage, even though it sometimes does.
The boom bots of Dr. Boom. I do remember the game be extremely hectic, and I think that's what made the game a little bit more fun. It was because it was just such a wacky experience at the time compared to what classic Hearthstone was. But I don't think the enjoyment was.
Yo, how you doing, Warshack? Top Notch is in the chat. Who's Top Notch? And yo, what up? First time. No, not first time chat. What up, Funk?
As good as classic Hearthstone, probably about the same as Curses Naxxramas. Just really ridiculous metagame. Next we had Blackrock Mountain, and I'm gonna take a really big leap here and say this is one of the best times in Hearthstone, even though most people will remember this as the Patron Warrior days. And even though that deck was extremely good, there was still a lot of variety and a lot of really cool things to try out. Emperor Thorson, Dragon Priest, the whole idea of going through the Molten Core was just so fun, and it made you just really appreciate the flavor that they put into this adventure. This is an easy A tier for me. Next, we have the Grand.
So Blackrock Mountain had a lot of flavorful things because Blackrock is some of the late game stuff you do in actual World of Warcraft, which I play. So like, it was just cool to like have the bosses that I was like, you know, killing and whatnot and playing in WoW also be characters or cards that you could play in this game. So it was just like really good. And also to note, Rarran's done a fantastic job on this video. Editing is top notch, man.
Grand tournament, and I think overall the grand tournament was okay. Wasn't
grand tournament was
great,
fucking
wasn't
trash.
Super bad, but I think the keywords failing was a huge aspect of it. But there was a lot of Secret Paladin.
Yeah, so the grand tournament introduced the new keyword inspire, and inspire was a keyword based on you using your hero power. So if you used your hero power, it would trigger inspire, and it was absolutely trash. It was horrible. But yeah, Mysterious Challenger was a card that came out of this, and he was called Dr. 6. So you'd like Mysterious Challenger on 6, Dr. Boom on 7, and then Tyrion on 8. And that was basically, or Lothab on 5. This was the absolute best curve in the game, hands down. Shielded Minibot on turn 2, 2 mana 2/2 Divine Shield. Muster for battle on turn 3. Summon 3 1/1 Silverhand recruits, equip a 1/3 weapon. Turn 4 Piloted Shredder, 4 mana 4/3 Death Rattle, summon a 2-drop. Turn 5 Lothab, 5 mana 5/5 battle cry. Your opponent's spells cost 5 more the next turn. Mysterious Challenger, 6 mana 6/6 battle cry. Put one of each secret from your deck into the battlefield. The secrets you would run was like Noble Sacrifice, Avenge, the one that like gave HP to your minions. There was quite a few annoying ones at that time as well. And then the 7 mana 7/7 Dr. Boom, summon the Boom bots, and then of course Tyrion, the 8 mana 6/6 Divine Shield, taunt, death rattle when it dies, summon a 5/3 Assbringer. So
due to Mysterious Challenger,
that was the best curve. That
Dragon
was
Priest
the
into
absolute best curve you could have in the game at that time, and it was done by Secret Secret Paladin.
fruition, which was really cool. Did have Justicar Trueheart, which I was an absolute huge fan of. So because of
Justicar Trueheart was my absolute favorite card to ever be printed. This gave way to Control Warrior at its like core form, and being able to tank up. It would change the hero power to gain 4 armor instead of 2. So this was like an absolute staple in Warrior. It was actually quite good in the Paladins as well, because it would allow them to summon multiple 1/1s. And that was a mid-range Paladin, was quite a powerful deck. But yeah, Justicar Trueheart was like one of my favorite cards ever printed. Even though like the Grand Tournament sucked as like a set, like it was still like it gave way to like a lot of really cool cards.
Justicar Trueheart alone, I'm gonna put this at a high C. One of the more weaker expansions we've seen in Hearthstone. Next, we have the League of Explorers, and I think overall the League of Explorers was actually a really well done expansion.
This was Reno.
It wasn't super broken, and it kind of came out of nowhere, which was really nice. And I really hope that Blizzard does that more often.
The League of Explorers expansion released, and I was playing Hearthstone pretty like thoroughly at the time, and I didn't even know it was out. It was like the sneakiest expansion that they've ever done. There was like nothing. They just dropped it. There was no lead up. There was no post. There was no it coming. They literally just released an expansion and didn't say anything. And then I logged in. I'm like, what? New expansion? What? It was like crazy. It was the sneakiest expansion to ever come out.
Where they just kind of drop random expansions because it made the metagame a lot more interesting. Now, this is also the first time we saw Reno Jackson.
Reno Jackson, baby.
Highlander, at least Starseeker was cool. We got Sir Finley, which helped a lot of decks try different stuff. This was a really cool expansion. I think this is actually one of the more A-tier adventures for sure.
Yeah,
Whispers of the Old Gods
was
arguably one of the best time in Hearthstone. Now, the reason why Whispers was so good is because this is the rotation of Standard and Wild, where they rotated Nax and GVG out of Standard, which opened the metagame so much more. Whispers of the Old Gods was a really well done expansion too. The Old Gods themselves were really powerful and really unique. It really brought the game.
Cthulhu and N'Zoth Druid, or Cthulhu and N'Zoth Control Warrior with Justicar was some of my favorite, basically Hearthstone I have ever played. We're gonna get to like where Barnes was introduced into the game, which made Rage really fucking stupid because you would have like Rage or Barnes Hunter, and they would just like coin Barnes on 3, and then they would pull Rage, and then Rage would pull Rage, so they'd have like 15 stats on the board on turn 3. But yeah,
game into a complete different direction. There was something for everyone. The meta was so varied in what it could do. Control decks were there, aggro decks were there, not a lot of combo, really well done expansion. And I honestly wish we can go back and try that expansion again for the first time because it was that good. S tier. Next we have One Night in Karazhan. And honestly, when it comes to adventures,
I'm gonna tell you right now, One Night in Karazhan was by far the absolute worst fucking adventure I have ever seen ever. This thing was so bad. This was so bad. One Night in Karazhan was fucking horrible.
The flavor here was really well done, but the expansion itself was, it was definitely a really scary expansion. The problem with this is that there was a lot of really good cards that were super polarizing and a lot of cards that didn't do anything.
Yeah, the flavor was cool. Karazhan was a fantastic dungeon.
Barnes was an extremely frustrating card. We saw the rise of Discard Lock, Secret Mage, Secret Hunter, Unicorn Priest, am I right? I think generally speaking, like a lot of the cards were cool. This expansion was really powerful in the wrong ways, and I don't really remember being it super good, so I'm gonna give it like a C. Mean Streets of Gadgetzan is the next expansion, and this expansion was extremely powerful. The Cabal with all the Highlander stuff. We saw the rise of pirates with patches of the pirates.
Mean Streets was
really
great.
Interesting archetype of
you better put this in A.
Which you know,
probably
wasn't for the best. And we saw Grimy Goons, which didn't really do anything because it was just ridiculously slow. This was a really ridiculous expansion, and Druid and Warrior really took charge of the whole metagame. You see what I did there? Oh my god, this expansion was not super fun, and it was super ridiculous. This is a C. Next, we have Journey to Ungoro.
Journey to Ungoro, S tier.
Old gods. The flavor in this expansion was legitimately one of the best.
Journey to this S tier. S tier, baby. S tier. Put this S tier while I make a drink.
I thought the quest mechanic was really fun, even though a lot of them were extremely powerful. It didn't feel like it was unfun to play against unless it was Quest Rogue, which I know Quest Rogue was ridiculous. Even the Quest Mage one was, but again, it just felt like a brand new game, and the meta was just wide open. There was so much things you can do. Silence Priest was a deck, so that was kind of cool. I just remember this expansion being really fun. It's an S tier for me.
Yeah,
next we have
baby, S tier.
And honestly,
Knights
people really like this
I'm gonna pause this shit
but
here.
I don't remember it being.
Knights in the Frozen Throne is where all the first set of Death Knights came out for the heroes. Fucking Build-A-Bear Workshop for the Hunter. The dude, it was just bullshit. While some of them were fine, like Vanessa, and Mage, there was like ones like Warrior, which saw no play. There was like just really, really powerful ones, and then there was just ones that were like fine, right? And because how good the good ones were, they outshined every single other of the DKs. So I do not particularly rate this expansion expansion so high, but however, ICC and actual WoW was one of the most fun, if not the most fun raid I have ever done. That's when I was raid leading in World of Warcraft, and we were doing heroic ICC, and we were one of the first ones on our server to do it. And for anybody of you who happen to play World of Warcraft at this time, it was on Area 52 when we played this. I was in the guild Delicious Cake. If you want to look it up, that shit's lit. Also, I'm going to go get a monster real fast, so give me 1 second, guys. BRB. All right, sorry about that. Let's get it done.
Super fun because a lot of it felt like it was just covered by Shadow Reaper Anduin, and we also got Prince Keleseth in this expansion, so wasn't a super great time to be
Spreading Plague,
the game. Spreading Plague was also introduced, but I will give credit where credit is due. Adding the Lich King was really fun. Adding the new Death Knights was a really interesting mechanic because that was the first time we got hero cards. So there's definitely a lot of really cool stuff in this expansion, and I do think it was more fun than Main Streets of Gaddison, so I will put it at B, even though there was some really powerful stuff. So next we have Cobalt and Catacombs, and I think Cobalt and Catacombs was just a really powerful expansion that was, I guess, testing the limits of what power creeping can do, because this expansion was just bonkers, right? Recruit was really good. They introduced the weapons with Kingsbane and Skull Minari. The cube was really cool. I like that thing. Spiteful Summoner sucked. There was just a lot of really powerful stuff that made the game feel just absolutely ridiculous for no reason whatsoever. And I don't remember this expansion being super great because of how ridiculous it was. And I think recruiting is a little bit questionable, especially if you don't do it in the right way. I do think that this was worse than Mean Streets of Gaddison, though, at a C. Next, we have the Witchwood, and the Witchwood will be forever remembered as Baku and...
This is the worst. Besides this, all right, so One Night in Karazhan was the worst mini set or adventure to come out ever. Witchwood was the absolute worst expansion to ever hit the floor because of one thing, and that's Gen and Baku, which he's probably going to cover, of course. Those cards were so bad for the game that, as we know, cards rotate every 2 years in and out of the game from the previous last 3 sets that have come out. Gen and Baku got rotated into the wild format a completely year early, a full year early. They just got rotated right in because they were warping the game so bad. So we didn't even get to like feel out how this expansion could play because of those 2 cards. But on top of that, Echo was the first time they introduced that mechanic as well, and that basically didn't really do anything besides the Warrior 2-mana Echo card. But yeah, Gen and Baku were just so fucking bad.
And that's virtually it. Sure, Shutterwalk was there, but that's not really what you were worried about.
Fuck Shutterwalk too. That's my most hated card.
This is one of the worst expansions we've ever seen. I actually did a whole video on it that I recommend you watch. I'll leave it in the description down below. But the main reason was just because Baku and Gen really set the stage of what the year was going to be like. The expansion itself was rather...
Something that I don't like is how fast the cards are moving. It's actually giving me a headache, because I'm trying to keep track of all the cards, but it's moving so quickly that my eyes can't keep up. I know what I'm seeing, but it's just the scrolling is way too fast. I might message Rarran about that. Like that is way too fast. It is giving me fucking eye spasms.
Week, it didn't really have a lot of really redeeming qualities. I do think Monster Hunt was pretty fun. I remember playing that a lot, but Standard absolutely sucked. This is the first D in the whole tier list. Next, we have the Boomsday Project, and the Boomsday Project was an interesting one. There was a lot of really powerful stuff in this expansion. Dr. Boom, Mad Genius, Ziliax, Mech Hunter was a huge aspect of it.
I want to say A or B,
which did introduce a lot of interesting combo decks in the format. We also got the Puzzle Labs, which I think is one of the most fun additions to Hearthstone ever. But generally speaking, the Boomsday Project actually managed to have an impact after what the Witchwood brought to us with Gen and Baku, even though there was still a bunch of odd decks in the format. I do think that the Boomsday Project was like kind of in the middle of the pack. It had something for everything. I don't think it was necessarily broken. I don't think it was necessarily weak. I thought it was just a pretty good expansion overall. Next, we have Rastakhan's Rumble, and honestly, Rastakhan's Rumble,
I can tell you right now, Rastakhan's Rumble is going to be a C. I can tell you right now, the problem with Rastakhans is the power level of Rastakhans was so low in compared to everything else. So basically nothing in this set saw play besides Shirvala Paladin, which was an OTK Paladin deck. And that was basically the only thing I can remember out of Rastakhans was Shirvala.
And honestly, Rastakhan's Rumble is just so forgettable. Overkill was just, what a mistake of a mechanic that was. A lot of the stuff in this expansion was just really bad. Didn't make an impact whatsoever. And it basically just took the best cards of this set and just kind of put them into the already good decks that we already had. I will say Akar and Shirvala are two of my favorite legendaries of all time, but the set was just too weak to see any play. The flavor was really good, but unfortunately for Rastakhans, it's a D. Next, we have Rise of Shadows. And Rise of Shadows was a really cool expansion flavor-wise and introduced this year-long
Rise of the Shadows.
I'm not including
going to the fucking start of the video. God damn it, Rarran. And I mean by Rarran and me for clicking on it. This was the lackeys. I am not a fan of lackeys. I absolutely hated lackeys. So I'm gonna rate this just because of lackeys, like a C or a D. But he'll probably rate it like a B or a C.
Shadows. And Rise of Shadows was a really cool expansion flavor-wise and introduced this year-long thing between the League of Evil and the League of Explorers, which I thought was really cool. But the biggest issue with this expansion was that it introduced lackeys. I hated that mechanic. I legitimately thought that mechanic was one of the worst ones we've ever seen. It just led to a lot of really ridiculous games because they were super impactful. And then the metagame was like, the first half was all aggro rogue with Evil Miscreant at 5 health. And then we got Control Warrior for the rest of the expansion. Not super great. I actually think it's one of the worst expansions I've ever played. Next, we have Sabers of Uldum, which introduced us back into Highlander cards. We saw Zephyrus. We saw a bunch of quests again, which were really fun. And honestly, this was a really good expansion in terms of what it brought to the game. A lot of variety, different ways of playing the game. There was Combo Priest, which was like an aggro deck that was pretty fun to play against, but it had a lot of moments where it would just win the game.
Reno was fine. I think Highlander's
kind of nerfed. We saw the metagame kind of open up quite a bit. And I think even though there was a lot of rough moments in Sabers of Uldum, it ended up being a really fun expansion at the end, and I really enjoyed it. I actually think it's one of the A-tier expansions. Also, the cinematic is beautiful. Next, we have Descent of Dragons, and I think a lot of people forget how powerful.
Yeah, Descent of Dragons was one of the most powerful sets to release. Descent of Dragons was actually just freaking massive. This completely warped the meta after the lackeys.
Powerful this expansion was. It introduced us to Galakrond, and Galakrond Shaman was really good for a couple weeks there. It introduced us to Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, which was just ridiculously powerful. Remember when it could discover itself? That was something. There was Necrim Apothecary Rogue, which was extremely ridiculous to play against, and it felt horrible to lose to. Generally speaking, this expansion was just insanely powerful, but there was a lot of really fun stuff to do. And I think even though the decks were just extreme and there was so much chaos, this expansion was fun. It reminded me a lot of Knights of the Frozen Throne, just a completely wacky expansion where there was just a lot of stuff to do. So it's going in the B tier. Next, we have Ashes of Outlands, and quite honestly,
this set was broken. Demon Hunter has the most nerfed cards out of like every class ever. Like over 50% of all of the cards that were originally released with Demon Hunter have been changed.
Honestly, this expansion was just Demon Hunter, or you're playing in Rage Warrior for a majority of it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, considering that, well, Demon Hunter was a brand new class and it added a lot new qualities to the game. But if you did not like Demon Hunter, you were probably not playing Hearthstone at the time. So it's an extremely polarizing expansion, especially because, well, Demon Hunter was really good for a lot of it. So because of how strong Demon Hunter was, and because there wasn't a lot of variety to this expansion, it's probably like a high C, I would say. They added a new class. What can I say? So Skullmans Academy is our next expansion. And this expansion, in my opinion, is the strongest expansion we've ever received.
I would have to agree with that. Skullmans was huge.
See, there was so many good qualities.
What made Skullmans huge is it activated basically a bunch of OTK decks. Like, Skullmans was the start of basically an OTK meta. This is where things rotated into like every different class having its own OTK. And that's not, you know, there was a lot of cards in the meta, which makes sense. Like, the more cards there is in the pool to play with, the more broken shit you can do, and it kind of builds each expansion until the rotation, and then everything gets basically taken away. Power level goes back to what is the bottom, and then you work your way back up again, and then the next year, the rotation happens, and it goes back down. But yeah, Skullmans was like a super enzyme in the OTK material, and it was a very powerful expansion.
Cards. Almost every single class had a unique archetype to try, and I feel like even though the game was so extreme, this is when Hearthstone was almost at its most fun in a very long time. Just so much ridiculous stuff to do. It felt like every single type of archetype had a chance, maybe not as much attrition anymore. It was kind of wacky. Guardian Animals dominated, but because of the new development team, they were nerfing extremely quickly, so there was just a lot of different stuff to try. And I don't know, there's something special about Skullmans Academy. Maybe it's the flavor, maybe it's the Spellburst keyword, which I really thought was a well-designed keyword. I hope they bring that one back, by the way. I really like Spellburst. Really powerful. And don't get me wrong, I think there was a lot of stupid stuff in it, but the stupid stuff really just, you know, matched the other stupid stuff. And I think if everything is just stupid, nothing's stupid, right? So I'm gonna give Skullmans Academy
an S. And you know what this is looking like? A fucking bell curve. A bell curve determines everything at all points in time, forever, in everything.
I mean, A, maybe a B.
No, don't do B.
Sounds better.
Yeah,
Our next
B's fine,
expansion
whatever.
is Darkmoon Fair, and honestly,
He's just making it more of a bell curve, baby.
Darkmoon Fair was just not really an
Darkmoon Fair is, wasn't a huge fan, just because like it felt like a lesser Old Gods. You know what I mean? Like, it was like basically an Old Gods expansion, but it just wasn't as cool or as good as the first round. It was like basically, you know, like Spider-Man 1 and then Spider-Man 2. Like, Spider-Man 1 is always going to be better.
expansion, because all it really did was just add to existing archetypes. It did bring back the old gods, which I think was really fun, but because the powerhouse that was like Demon Hunter and basically the really good decks from Skullmans Academy stayed around, they didn't really get a huge chance to shine. It felt like this expansion was just kind of padding existing decks, almost like Rastakhan's Rumble. The corrupt mechanic I think was kind of cool. Theme was fine. It added some interesting...
That was actually a mechanic that I had called out like a month before the expansion released. We were doing the Meta Breakers podcast and somebody asked what the mechanic was. At that time, I was also playing WoW pretty heavily, and WoW had a corrupt mechanic in it, and the mechanic was horrible. So like gear could be corrupted, and then if you had like a certain amount of corrupt on your gear and like a certain stat on corrupt, you would do like 80% of your damage would be like through a corrupt mechanic through the gear itself instead of your character doing it. It was all like gear and stat based. So I just assumed that they were going to put in a corrupt mechanic, and I called that shit. I called that shit big. Whose video is this? This is Rarran.
Stuff like Silas Darkmoon, but overall it wasn't super impactful, and I felt like it just kind of was there. So probably around a C. I don't know. Yeah. I think like I could maybe put it as a B, but I think it's around a C. I think it's around here. Forge of the Barons is our next expansion. This introduced us to the Frenzy keyword. We saw the mercenaries for the first time, and generally speaking, this expansion was a lot more wide open than Darkmoon Fair was. It felt like there was a lot of different stuff to try, but it ended up being a really weird metagame because Control Priest, which generated card after card after card, was the top dog.
This was the 45-minute meta
time, which a lot of people did not like. And I think the idea was that they wanted to go away a little bit from like what Skullmans Academy was, but it wasn't a super enjoyable expansion at the end, even though you could try a bunch of stuff. With the limited card pool and basically what the game was doing at the time, I think a lot of people stopped playing near the end of Forge of the Barrens. Yeah, I don't think Forge of the Barrens was a super well done expansion, but it was definitely not the worst. I think it was probably like a C. It was basically like Demon Hunter, but like the reverse of it. United Instrument is our next expansion, and this introduced us to the questline mechanic, and it basically introduced us into a metagame where
this was another not so good one. This was the entire, quest mage, quest shaman, quest warlock. This
felt
was
like
not
you
good either.
had to kill someone or you were just gonna die. There was no room for slow type decks, and this was a metagame that was purely based on combo decks. If you like combo decks, then this was probably a really good expansion for you. But my overall enjoyment was at probably the lowest it's ever been, because I did not want to play Hearthstone at all during this time. And I think a lot of the casual people can probably agree with me that this expansion felt like there wasn't a lot of room to do anything you really wanted to. This is probably a D for me. This actually is probably worse than the Witchwood for me, honestly. Fractured in Altarok Valley is the last expansion on this list. And honestly,
this expansion honestly hasn't been that bad. There's been a lot of different decks and a lot of different classes. This has been a surprisingly decent expansion. We're on the come up, boys.
Altarok Valley was a lot better than I expected it to be, because while United Stormwind was just ridiculous, this tried its absolute hardest to probably, bring control decks back into the game, and I think it succeeded. The metagame at the moment is really well done, and there's a lot of variety in this expansion. A lot of powerful and fun stuff to do. A lot of creativity can be done. This was a really good expansion. It was also the ending of the Mercenaries campaign or storyline, and I honestly think that they did a really good job. This is probably an A tier for me. That's my tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you disagree with me, that's completely.
Yeah, there's the only thing that I solely disagreed with was Mean Streets and the base set of Hearthstone. I think base set of Hearthstone should have been S, and then Mean Streets should have been like an A or a B. But besides that, Rarran definitely hit the nail on the head with it. He brought up most of the most prominent cards. He obviously, with being like a video that needs to be under 20 minutes, like he couldn't go into details like I did about each and every fucking thing. Overall, very well put together video. Rarran's been hammering it out these kind of videos. His sub count's been going up. His views have been going up. So good shit, Rarran.